Nathan Cole hadn't cried in 11 years. Not at his father's funeral. Not the night the bank called about the farm. Not even the morning he watched Claire Reed drive away with everything packed into one bag and didn't chase her. But right now, at 7:22 in the morning, standing alone in his kitchen, in worn boots and yesterday's flannel, he grabbed the nearest chair and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall, cracked clean through. He didn't move, just stood there breathing hard. Phone still warm in his fist, the caseworker's words still echoing in the silence. She left you a daughter, 7 years old, and you have 72 hours before the state takes her permanently. A daughter. 7 years old. He hadn't even known her name until 4 minutes ago. And the woman who should have told him the only woman he'd ever actually loved had been dead for 11 days. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it hits you somewhere real, subscribe. Because what happens next will change everything you think you know about family. Nathan Cole woke up at 5:14 a.m. He always did. No alarm. No phone buzzing on the nightstand. Just his body trained by years of military routine, pulling him out of sleep like a hand gripping his collar. The same time every morning, every season, every year, since he'd left the Navy at 38. He pulled on his boots in the dark, didn't turn on the lights. He knew every inch of that farmhouse the way a sailor knows the layout of his ship, by feel by memory, by the kind of knowledge that lives in your hands instead of your head. Outside the orchard was still. 47 acres of apple trees standing in rows like soldiers at parade rest. November fog sitting low between the branches. The kind of quiet that most men would find peaceful. Nathan found it useful. Quiet meant no distractions. Quiet meant work could begin. He grabbed his gloves off the porch railing, walked to the first row of trees, and started the morning inspection. The same way he'd started every morning for 5 years methodically, without sentiment. He checked stakes, checked irrigation lines, counted the late-season fruit that still clung to the branches in the cold. His mouth moved sometimes counting out loud, making notes in the small black notebook he carried in his chest pocket. No one ever saw those notebooks. No one was ever around. He had 2 part-time workers who came in on Wednesdays and Fridays, brothers named Pete and Cal from the town of Harlan, 18 miles down the county road. They did what he told them. They didn't ask personal questions. They collected their pay in cash on Friday afternoons and drove home without making conversation. That was the arrangement. Nathan had made it clear from the start. He wasn't unfriendly. He just didn't need people. That was the story he told himself. He'd told it so many times that he'd stopped noticing it was a story. By 7 a.m. he was back inside, standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of black coffee and the farm's maintenance log open in front of him. A faucet in the barn had been dripping for 3 days. He wrote it down. Added it to the list beneath replace hinge on gate 3 and recaulk south window before first hard freeze. He worked through his list the same way he'd worked through mission briefings, one item at a time. No skipping, no shortcuts. The Navy had given him that. Structure, sequence, the discipline of doing things right or not at all. What the Navy had not given him, and what no amount of discipline could repair, was the silence that filled every room he walked into. He didn't think about it much, or rather, he had trained himself not to. His phone rang at 7:22 a.m. Unknown number. County area code. He almost didn't answer. He let it ring twice, 3 times, then picked it up because ignoring things had never been his style. Nathan Cole. The voice was a woman's, professional. The kind of voice trained to stay flat no matter what it was delivering. Speaking. This is Sandra Klein. I'm a family services caseworker with the Dunmore County Department of Child Welfare. He said nothing, just waited. I'm calling regarding a woman named Claire Reed. Do you know that name? The coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down. Yes, he said. I knew her. Knew. Past tense. He noticed he'd used it automatically before the caseworker had told him anything. Some part of him had already understood the shape of the call. Mr. Cole, I'm sorry to inform you that Miss Reed passed away 11 days ago. Pancreatic cancer. She was diagnosed 14 months prior. A pause. She was 39 years old. Nathan sat down at the kitchen table. He didn't remember deciding to sit. His legs just found the chair. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. "Because that was what you said." Because the Navy had taught him to respond to information with appropriate acknowledgement before processing. Claire Reed. He hadn't spoken to her in 8 years. Hadn't seen her in 9. She had been... He reached for the right word and couldn't find one, clean enough for what she'd actually been. She had been the woman he'd loved before the farm consumed him. Before the debt and the bank notices, and his father's failing health had pulled him back to Harlan County when he was still in uniform, still young enough to believe he could carry it all. She had waited as long as she could. Then she had left. He had not blamed her. He had also never fully recovered. But he had built the recovery into the structure of his days until the wound was load-bearing, until taking it out would collapse everything. "Mr. Cole," the caseworker's voice came back careful and deliberate. "There's more to this call." "Go ahead." "Ms. Reed had a daughter, 7 years old. Her name is Lily." He said nothing. According to documents Ms. Reed filed before her death and confirmed by a DNA sample she had taken and registered through a legal clinic. Another pause, shorter this time. "You are listed as Lily's biological father." Nathan Cole had held his composure in places most men never go. He had kept his voice steady, reporting casualties. He had maintained his bearing in rooms where generals were shouting and junior officers were silently falling apart. He had not flinched at funerals, at emergency briefings, at news that should have broken something inside him. But the kitchen was very quiet, and his hand had stopped working. The phone slipped from his fingers and hit the table with a crack, bouncing once before he caught it. He pressed it back to his ear. "I don't..." His voice came out wrong, too low, too rough, like it hadn't been used properly in months. "I didn't know." "I understand," Sandra Klein said, and her voice had shifted, not softer exactly, but more careful, the way people get when they know they're talking to someone who is about to break. "Ms. Reed kept that information from you. We don't know why. She didn't leave a letter explaining it." "Where is she now?" The "where is Lily now?" "She's been placed in a temporary foster home in Morrisville. That's about 40 minutes from your location." A breath. "Mr. Cole, I need to be very clear with you about the timeline. Lily is currently in temporary placement, which means the county has 72 hours from this morning to either confirm a permanent guardian arrangement or begin the formal process of longer-term foster placement, which could lead to adoption," Nathan said flatly. "It's possible, yes. I want to be honest with you." He stood up from the table. He walked to the window and looked out at the orchard without seeing it. "What do I have to do?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was the voice he used when he needed information for a mission, tactical, stripped of everything personal. "You'd need to appear before a family court judge within 48 hours. They'll want to see evidence of stable housing, stable income, and..." Sandra Klein paused again. "Ideally, a stable household situation. A 2-parent home significantly improves the likelihood of the judge granting guardianship to a first-time single parent with no prior record of custody." The word landed on him like a weight. 2-parent home. He looked around the farmhouse, at the single coffee mug on the counter, at the one chair pulled up to the table, at the life he had spent years building into the exact shape of one person living alone. "I understand," he said. "I'll email you the court documentation. The hearing is scheduled for Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. Thursday. That was 47 hours away. "Thank you," he said. And he hung up. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he opened his black notebook and wrote 3 words at the top of a blank page. "Figure this out." He made 4 phone calls in the next hour. The first was to the county legal aid office, where a tired paralegal named Gordon told him with no cruelty, but also no softness, that without a co-parent or established household partner, first-time guardianship cases for biological fathers with no prior contact were extremely difficult, especially on a compressed timeline. "Judges are cautious," Gordon said. "You're not just proving you want her, you're proving she'd be safe." The second call was to his accountant to confirm that the farm was solvent. It was barely. He had land. He had assets. He had income. That part he could prove. The third call was to his only real friend, a former Navy Chief Warrant Officer named Burl Haddon, who now lived 3 states away and picked up on the second ring. "I need advice," Nathan said. "That bad. I have a daughter. I didn't know she existed until 40 minutes ago. Her mother just died. I have 47 hours to prove to a court that I can provide a stable home, or she goes into the system." There was a long silence on Burl's end. "What's the obstacle?" "2-parent household. I've got the land. I've got the income. I've got the house. I don't have—" He stopped. "I don't have the other part." "Nathan." Burl's voice was careful. "What exactly are you thinking about doing? I need someone to stand with me in that courtroom. Someone credible. Someone who looks like they belong there." "You mean someone who looks like your wife?" Nathan said nothing. "That is—" Burl exhaled slowly. "That is the most insane thing I've ever heard from a man who once talked down a port security standoff using only a clipboard and a flashlight. Do you have a better idea?" "No," Burl admitted. "But I also don't know who on earth you think is going to agree to." "I have one person," Nathan said. "I just need to make the call." He sat with the phone in his hand for 11 minutes before he dialed. Victoria Hale was not a person you called without preparation. She wasn't a friend, she was something more complicated than that. He had met her 2 years ago when she'd inquired about purchasing part of the county land adjacent to his orchard for a logistics hub her company was developing. The deal had fallen through when Nathan refused to sell access rights to the Eastern Access Road. The negotiation had lasted 4 days. By the end of it, he had a grudging respect for her, and he suspected she had the same for him. She had given him her personal number when they'd concluded not out of warmth, but with the bluntness of a woman who filed people into categories and had decided he belonged in the category of people worth knowing. He had never used the number. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Nathan Cole." Her voice was exactly as he remembered it. No greeting, just his name like she was identifying a variable. "I don't hear from you for 2 years and then you call before 8 in the morning. I need to ask you something," he said. "And I need you to let me finish before you respond." A pause. "Go ahead." He told her everything. The caseworker's call. The daughter he didn't know existed. The 47 hours. The courthouse. The 2-parent requirement. He told it the way he'd been trained to deliver intelligence reports, chronological, factual, no unnecessary editorializing. He did not ask for sympathy. He did not tell her he was falling apart. When he finished, the line was silent for 4 full seconds. "You want me to marry you?" Victoria said slowly. "Just for a court case." "Temporarily," Nathan said. "Paper only. For the court hearing. To establish household stability." "You understand what you're asking?" "I do." "And you're asking me specifically because—" "Because you're the only person I know who can make it believable," he said. "You're credible. You're a known entity in this county. You're—" He stopped, adjusted. "You're capable of making a decision like this clearly without emotion getting in the way." He meant it as a compliment. He wasn't entirely sure it landed that way. Another silence. Longer. "Let me be very clear about something," Victoria said, and her voice had changed, not colder, but sharper, the way a blade gets right before it's used. "If I do this, there are conditions, non-negotiable." Nathan straightened slightly without thinking. Old reflex. Stand up when the brief gets serious. "No deception between us," she said. "Not about the child, not about the arrangement, not about anything. I will not be managed." "Agreed. No emotional manipulation. You don't use the child to make me feel obligated. You don't use this situation to create something that isn't there." "Agreed." The child comes first. In every room, in every decision, in every conversation where she's present. I don't care about appearances. I care about what she actually experiences. "Agreed." "And the marriage has to be believable in that courtroom," she continued. "Not a performance. Believable. Which means we behave like 2 people who have made a real choice, not 2 strangers in a bad situation." I understand. A final pause, the longest one. I'll be at your farm at 7 tomorrow morning, Victoria said. Have coffee ready. And Nathan. Yeah, you'd better be worth the inconvenience. She hung up. Nathan stood in his kitchen, looking at the worn grain of the table, at the single coffee mug, at the notebook, still open to the page where he'd written, "Figure this out." Below it, his hand moved. He wrote, "She said yes." Then he looked up at the window again, past the orchard, past the fog still moving between the rows of apple trees. Somewhere 40 minutes away, in a house he'd never seen, a 7-year-old girl, with a name he'd only heard once, was waking up. A girl who had his blood and her mother's eyes, and no one left in the world who'd chosen to claim her yet. Nathan Cole had survived 3 deployments of foreclosure, and the kind of loneliness that settles into a man's bones like cold. He told himself he could survive this too. He was not yet sure he was right. The next morning came faster than Nathan expected, and slower than he could stand. He hadn't slept. Not really. He'd lain on top of the covers with his boots still on, staring at the ceiling, running numbers in his head, the way he used to run pre-deployment checklists. Square footage of the farmhouse. Number of bedrooms. Income from last harvest. Legal documentation he'd need to pull before Thursday morning. He was good at lists. Lists meant control. Lists meant he was doing something. But every time the list stopped, the same image came back. A 7-year-old girl, in a house that wasn't hers, in a bed that wasn't hers, with people who were kind strangers at best, waiting, not knowing if anyone was coming. At 6:47 a.m., he heard tires on the gravel. He was already at the window. Victoria Hale drove a dark gray SUV. No nonsense, no vanity plates. She parked straight, got out without hesitating, and walked to the front door like she'd been here before. She wore a charcoal blazer over a simple black shirt and dark jeans. No jewelry except a watch. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like a woman who had decided something and was done deliberating about it. Nathan opened the door before she knocked. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said good morning. "You look terrible," she said. "I didn't sleep." "I know." She stepped inside, glanced around the kitchen without commenting on it, and moved toward the counter. "Is that coffee, or is that regret in a pot?" "Both," he said. She almost smiled. Not quite. She poured herself a cup, turned, and leaned against the counter with both hands wrapped around the mug. "All right, talk to me. Where are we actually at?" Nathan pulled out the folder he'd put together overnight. Printed documents, farm financials, the legal aid notes Gordon had walked him through. He set it on the table between them. Court is Thursday at 9, hearing in front of Judge Patricia Odom. She has a reputation for being thorough and skeptical of arrangements that feel rushed. "They always feel rushed when they are rushed," Victoria said. She opened the folder, flipped through it without rushing herself. "Your financials are solid. The farm is carrying debt, but the asset value covers it." "That's not what I said. I said they're solid." She looked up. "You have land structure, income history, and no criminal record. On paper, you're not the problem." She set the folder down. "The problem is that you've lived alone on 47 acres for 5 years, and no one in that courtroom is going to look at this house and believe a 7-year-old belongs here without help." "I know that. So what they need to see," she said, setting the mug down, "is not just a father. They need to see a household. 2 people who've made a choice together, not 2 strangers who made a phone call 48 hours ago." "Which is why you're here." "Which is why I'm here," she agreed. Her eyes were steady on his. "Nathan, I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "Go ahead." "When was the last time you let another person help you with something?" He opened his mouth. "Something real," she added. "Not a hired hand. Not a logistics arrangement. Something where you actually needed the other person and you admitted it." The silence ran long enough that it answered for him. Victoria nodded slowly. "Okay, then let's get something straight before we walk into that courthouse." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "I'm not here to manage you. I'm not here to perform. I am here because a child who has already lost everything needs someone in her corner before Thursday morning, And you called me because you had no other option." She paused. "I'm not offended by that. I understand it. But I need you to understand something in return." "What's that?" "I don't do things halfway," she said. "If I'm in this room, I'm in it completely. If I'm standing beside you in that courtroom, I am standing beside you, not decorating the scene. Which means I need to know things. Real things. About Claire. About how you lived. About what happened between you two, and why there's a child in Morrisville who you didn't know existed until yesterday morning." Nathan looked at his coffee. "That's not a small ask," he said. "No," Victoria said. "It's not." He was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair on his side of the table and sat down. Not because he was ready, because he recognized that this was one of those moments where readiness was a luxury he didn't have. "Claire and I met when I was 26, he said. "I was stationed out of Norfolk. She was finishing her nursing degree in Virginia Beach. We were together for almost 4 years. He stopped, started again. "My father's health started going in my 3rd year of service. The farm was in debt, had been for a long time, but my dad had kept it from me. When it got bad enough, I got early separation orders processed and came back. And Claire, she couldn't come here," he said. "I mean, she could have. I asked her to." He looked at his hands. But this place, it was failing. It was falling apart. There was nothing to come to except work and debt and a sick man and 47 acres that were more liability than anything else. I told her it might be years before it turned around. What did she say? She said she'd already waited 2 years through 2 deployments, and she was 31 years old and she couldn't wait anymore. He said it without anger. Just the flat weight of a fact that had settled into him so long ago, it had become part of the foundation. So she left, and I stayed. "And you never talked again." "Once," he said. "About 6 months after. She called to get the last of her things mailed to her. It was short. It was already over. She had moved. Different city. I didn't ask which one." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "And now you know why she didn't tell you." Nathan looked up. "She didn't tell you," Victoria said carefully, "because telling you meant coming back into a life she had already survived leaving. And maybe she thought you wouldn't want it. Or maybe she couldn't face it. Or maybe—" She stopped. "People make choices when they're in pain that don't always make sense to anyone else. She should have told me," he said. And for the first time, something broke through the composure. Not rage, not grief. Exactly. Something rawer than both. "She should have told me I had a daughter. I would have. I would have found a way." "I know," Victoria said quietly. "I would have—" He said again louder and then caught himself. Pulled it back. Sat still. Victoria didn't look away. She didn't fill the silence with something easier. She just let it sit there between them, which was, Nathan realized, exactly the right thing to do. After a moment, he exhaled. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," she said. "You're allowed to be angry. Just maybe not in the courtroom." Something shifted in the air. Not warmth exactly. They weren't there yet, but something like the beginning of an understanding. 2 people on the same side of a table, looking at the same problem. "We need to talk about Lily," Victoria said. "Yeah." "What do you know about her?" "Almost nothing," he said. 7 years old. She's been in foster placement for 11 days since Claire died. The caseworker said she's—" He checked his notes. "She said Lily is quiet, that she doesn't talk much to the foster family, that she asks about her mother every evening before bed." Victoria was still. "That's a child in grief." "Yes." "She's not going to trust us." "No. She's going to test us," Victoria said. "Maybe not openly, maybe not with words, but she's going to watch everything. Kids who've been through loss, they watch. They track whether people mean what they say." She paused. "You understand that, right? That walking in there and introducing yourself as her father isn't going to do anything by itself." "I know. Do you—" Her voice wasn't harsh, but it was direct. "Because your instinct is going to be to take charge, to have a plan, to lead." She leaned forward slightly. "Nathan, that is exactly the wrong approach with a traumatized 7-year-old who just lost her mother." He looked at her. Then what's the right one? Consistency, she said. Patience, showing up the same way every time so she eventually believes you'll keep showing up. She paused. Which means this arrangement, whatever it becomes, can't feel like an arrangement to her. It has to feel like two people who chose each other enough to choose her. The word chose hung in the air. Nathan picked up his coffee, found it had gone cold, drank it anyway. We should go see her today, he said, before the court date. The caseworker said I could request a visit. Yes, Victoria said. We should. You'll come. She looked at him like the question was unnecessary. I already said I'm in this. He nodded. Called Sandra Klein's number from the folder and left a message requesting an afternoon visit. Then he looked across the table at Victoria, who was reading back through his legal documents with the focused quiet of someone who did not waste motion. Victoria, he said. She looked up. Why are you doing this? The question sat between them plainly. She didn't deflect it. She thought about it for a moment, genuinely thought about it, which he respected, and then she said, because 7 years old is too young to learn that no one's coming. She went back to the documents. Nathan didn't say anything else. Some answers don't need a response. They just need to be heard. Sandra Klein called back at 11:30. The visit was approved for 2 o'clock. She gave them the address and reminded Nathan gently, carefully, that Lily had been told a relative might be coming to see her, but had not been told the specifics. She doesn't know about you yet, Sandra said. We thought it was better to let you introduce yourself in person. Understood, Nathan said. He stood in the kitchen after he hung up, not moving for a long moment. You okay? Victoria asked from across the room. No, he said, which was the most honest thing he'd said in years. They drove separately, practical, not symbolic, and met in the parking lot of a quiet residential street in Morrisville at 5 minutes to 2. The foster home was an ordinary house. Well kept. Toys in the front yard. A wind chime on the porch. The kind of house that was trying hard to feel like a soft place to land. Nathan stood on the sidewalk and didn't move. Victoria came to stand beside him. Not touching, just present. You've faced worse, she said. Not like this, he said. No, she agreed. Not like this. They walked to the door together. The foster mother, a warm-eyed woman named Deb, opened before they knocked. She shook their hands and spoke in the careful, modulated way of someone accustomed to delicate situations. She said Lily was in the living room. She said Lily had been quiet today. She said Lily had eaten her lunch, which was apparently something to note. Nathan followed Deb through the hallway, and then he stopped. Because there she was, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the couch, a coloring book open in her lap. Not coloring. Just sitting with a red crayon held loosely in her hand, like she'd forgotten it was there. Small. Dark-haired. Wearing a yellow sweater 2 sizes too big for her. She looked up when they walked in. Her eyes were Claire's. Exactly Claire's. The shape of them, the color. It was like looking at a photograph he hadn't known existed. His chest did something complicated. Lily looked at him, then at Victoria, then back at him. Her expression didn't change. No smile, no fear, no welcome. Just the level assessing gaze of a child who had learned to read rooms before deciding how to behave in them. Hi, Lily, Nathan said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. My name is Nathan. She said nothing. He crouched down to her level. Something Burl had told him once years ago about talking to scared people get below their eye line. Don't loom. I knew your mom, he said. A long time ago, before you were born. Still nothing, but she hadn't looked away. I just found out about you yesterday, he said, and I came as fast as I could. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at the coloring book, then back up. You didn't come when Mom was sick, she said. The words were quiet, factual, not accusatory in the way an adult would be, just a child stating a thing that was true. A thing she'd been turning over in her mind the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. And Nathan Cole, who had held it together through the phone call, and the legal calls, and the sleepless night, and the drive and the walk to the door had no answer. Not one. He opened his mouth and nothing came, because she was right. He hadn't come, not because he hadn't wanted to, but because he hadn't known. And I didn't know was the truth. But it was also the worst possible sentence to say to a 7-year-old who had just watched her mother die without a single person from her father's side of the world walking through the door. Victoria stepped forward, quietly, without announcement, out. She crouched down beside Nathan close enough that Lily could see her face clearly, and she said not loudly, not with performance, just plainly and directly. "We didn't know you existed, Lily. Your mom kept that between her and herself, and we don't know exactly why. But I want you to hear something true." Lily looked at her. "We know now," Victoria said, "and we're not leaving." The room was very still. Lily looked at her for a long time. Then she looked at Nathan. Then she looked back down at her coloring book. She picked up the red crayon. Started coloring slowly, carefully staying inside the lines. She didn't smile. She didn't say it was okay. But she didn't get up and leave either. And Nathan understood in the way that a man understands something that bypasses language and goes straight to bone. That this right here was the hardest mission he had ever been given. Not because it required courage, because it required something he had never once been trained for. It required him to stay. They drove back from Morrisville, mostly in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that settles between two people who have just witnessed the same thing and need a moment before words become useful again. Nathan kept both hands on the wheel. Victoria watched the road from the passenger side. At some point, she'd accepted his offer to ride back together and leave her car, a practical decision, she'd said. He hadn't pushed for any other reason. Halfway back, she spoke. "She's been doing that for 11 days, Victoria said. Sitting in that room, waiting. I know. She's not going to fall apart in front of strangers. She's already decided that's not safe." Victoria turned slightly toward him. "But she watched you the whole time we were there. Even when she was coloring. She was watching." "I noticed." "That's not a bad sign," she said. "That's a child deciding whether or not to file you under safe or temporary." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Which one did she land on?" "She didn't land yet," Victoria said. "That's the point. She's still deciding, which means there's still time to do this right." He nodded once. Kept driving. "You froze," she said. Not accusatory, just accurate. "Yes." "When she said you didn't come." "Yes." "You're going to have to get better at not freezing," Victoria said. "Because she's going to say harder things than that. Kids who've been hurt don't test you once and stop. They test you every day until they believe the answer isn't going to change." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "How do you know all this?" Victoria looked out the window. "I was one of those kids," she said. Simply, without elaboration. And her tone made it clear she wasn't opening that door any further tonight. Nathan didn't push. Some things don't need to be pulled out of people. They come when they're ready, or they don't come at all. They got back to the farm at 4:30. Victoria sat down at the kitchen table with her laptop and started working through what needed to happen before Thursday. She had already, without asking him, contacted a family law attorney she knew named Gail Marsh, who had agreed to do an emergency consult by phone that evening. She had the court filing requirements pulled up. She had a list of supporting documents organized by priority. Nathan stood in the kitchen doorway watching her for a moment. "You didn't have to do all that," he said. "I know," she said without looking up. "I mean it. That's Nathan." She looked up then. "I told you I don't do things halfway. Stop being surprised every time I mean what I said." He went and made dinner. It was the only useful thing he could think to do. He made chili the way his mother had taught him from scratch. No shortcuts, because it was what he knew how to cook, and because standing at a stove doing something with his hands was the only thing keeping the day from sitting too heavily on his chest. They ate at the table together. The attorney called at 7. Gail Marsh was direct and efficient, and she told them what they needed to hear without softening it unnecessarily. "The judge is going to look at 3 things," Gail said over speakerphone. Stability of environment, capacity to provide, and emotional readiness for parenting. The first two you can document. The third one is what she's going to assess in person. What does that mean practically? Nathan asked. It means she's going to look at the two of you in that room and she's going to decide whether you look like people who showed up for a child or people who showed up for a legal outcome. A pause. There's a difference, and judges who've been doing this for 20 years can see it from across a room. We went to see Lily today, Victoria said. Good, that helps. Did it go well? Nathan and Victoria looked at each other across the table. It went honestly, Victoria said. That's better than well, Gail said. Bring anything that documents your visit. The foster mother can provide a statement about your conduct during the visit. I'll request that tonight. After the call ended, Nathan sat back in his chair. The kitchen was quiet, except for the wind moving outside and the occasional creak of the old house adjusting to the cold. She said the two of you, Nathan said. Victoria closed her laptop. Yes. In that room standing in front of a judge, you understand that's a different thing than standing in a foster home with a child. I understand that. Victoria. He leaned forward slightly. I need to ask you again, not because I don't believe you, but because tomorrow morning there is no walking it back. If you stand in that courtroom and something about this doesn't sit right with you, stop, she said. He stopped. I made a decision, she said. I don't unmake decisions because they get complicated. If I did, I wouldn't be running a company. She picked up her coffee cup. What you should be focused on right now is not whether I'm going to show up. I'm going to show up. What you should be focused on is what you're going to say to that judge when she asks you what kind of father you plan to be. The question dropped into the room like a stone into water. Nathan sat with it. I don't know how to answer that, he said finally. And he meant it not as a confession of weakness, but as a genuine acknowledgement that this was territory he had no map for. I know how to run a farm. I know logistics. I know structure. I know how to make a system work. I don't... He stopped. I don't know how to be a parent. Nobody does, Victoria said. Not at first. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be reassuring, she said. It's meant to be true. She set down the cup. What you do know is how to be consistent. How to show up at the same time every day, regardless of how you feel. How to keep something alive through difficulty. She looked around the kitchen, just briefly taking in the worn edges of it, the years of work embedded in every surface. You kept this place alive when everything said it shouldn't survive. That's not nothing, Nathan. He looked at the table. Something moved through his face that he didn't have a name for. Go to bed, she said. The guest room, I assume? Down the hall, second door. All right. She stood, picked up her laptop bag. We leave at 7:30. Wear something that says you're serious without saying you're trying too hard. I own 2 dress shirts, he said. I saw them in the laundry room. The dark blue one, she said, and walked down the hall. Nathan sat at the kitchen table alone for another 20 minutes. Then he washed both their dishes, turned off the lights, and went to bed. He slept 4 hours. It was enough. Thursday arrived the way hard days always do, unremarkably just the same gray light through the same windows, the same cold air, the world making no acknowledgement of what it was asking of you. They drove to the courthouse in Nathan's truck. Victoria was composed in a way that he found steadying, not because she was performing calm, but because she was genuinely focused. She went through the documents one more time on the drive. She asked him 2 questions about his income history and one about the farmhouse square footage, so she'd have the numbers ready if Gail needed them in the room. Gail Marsh met them on the courthouse steps. She was a compact woman in her early 50s with close-cropped silver hair and the manner of someone who had seen every version of this situation and remained unshockable. She shook their hands, looked at them both squarely, and said, "Let me do the leading. Answer what she asks you directly and completely. Don't volunteer things that weren't asked for. And when she looks at you," she pointed at Nathan, "look back. Don't look at your hands." Understood, Nathan said. One more thing. Gail looked between them. She may ask how you know each other. how you met, how long you've been—" She paused fractionally together. "I'd suggest keeping the answer short and honest." Victoria said, "We've known each other 2 years. We met through a business matter. We've been close since then." Gail studied her. "That works," she said. "Say it exactly that way." The courtroom was smaller than Nathan expected. A family court hearing room, wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a long table on one side where the caseworker sat with a county representative. Gail took her position. Nathan and Victoria sat beside her. Judge Patricia Odom came in without ceremony. She was in her 60s, silver-haired with reading glasses on a chain, and the unhurried manner of a woman who had stopped being impressed by urgency about 30 years ago. She opened the file, and read in silence for a full 2 minutes while the room waited. Then she looked up. "Mr. Cole," she said, "you learned of your daughter's existence 4 days ago." "Yes, ma'am. And in those 4 days you retained counsel, appeared in this court, and visited the child in placement." "Yes." "Tell me why you're here," she said. "Not tell me your case. Not tell me about your home. Tell me why you're here." The difference was intentional. Nathan heard it. He took a breath. "Because she's mine," he said. "I didn't know that until 4 days ago, and I can't change that. But I know it now. And I'm not going to let her spend one more day than necessary in a house with strangers when she has family that wants her." Judge Odom looked at him steadily. "You're a single man living alone on a farm in a county that doesn't have a school within reasonable distance of your property. Harlan Elementary is 12 miles from the farm," Nathan said. "I drove it this morning, 14 minutes. A slight pause. The judge made a note. "You have no prior parenting experience." "No, ma'am. No family support network nearby. I have 2 employees and—" He stopped himself from going further, recalibrated. "I have Victoria." Judge Odom shifted her gaze to Victoria. "Ms. Hale." "Your Honor?" "You're a CEO of a logistics company based in this county." "That's correct. You live in the county. I have a primary residence here, yes. And your relationship to Mr. Cole is—" "We've known each other for 2 years," Victoria said. Calm. Clear. "We met through a business matter. We've been close since then." The exact words. Exactly the way she'd rehearsed them in the car, without it sounding rehearsed. The judge looked at her for a long moment, then back at Nathan. "Mr. Cole, this child has experienced significant trauma, the loss of her only known parent, 11 days in foster placement, and now a courtroom where strangers are deciding her future." She folded her hands. "If I grant temporary guardianship, what does her life look like on day 1, not day 100? Day 1. Nathan thought about Lily in the yellow sweater, the red crayon held loosely in her hand. The way she'd looked at him, not with hope, not yet, but with the raw and careful attention of a child, deciding whether to hope. "She wakes up in the same house she went to sleep in," he said. "She has breakfast with people she's starting to know. She doesn't have to pack a bag." He paused. "And when she goes to bed that night, we're still there." The room was quiet. Sandra Klein, the caseworker, made a note without looking up. Judge Odom looked at Nathan for a long moment, then at Victoria, then back at the file. "I'm granting a 90-day temporary guardianship," she said. "During that period, Mr. Cole will be subject to bi-weekly check-ins with the county, 1 home visit per month conducted by Ms. Klein's office, and a formal review at the end of the 90 days to determine permanent placement." She looked up over her glasses. "This is not a rubber stamp. It is a conditional grant. I want to be very clear about what that means." "Understood," Nathan said. "It means," the judge said, "that I am giving you the opportunity to be what you said you'd be, not what you planned to be, what you said." She closed the file. "Ms. Klein will coordinate the transfer. Lily can be moved to your care as early as tomorrow morning, pending 1 final home assessment today." She stood. The room stood with her, and just like that, in a wood-paneled room under fluorescent lights in under 40 minutes, Nathan Cole became a father in the eyes of the law. He didn't feel relief. He didn't feel triumph. He felt the way he'd felt the first time he'd been given command of a logistics operation in a war zone, the immediate clarifying weight of responsibility landing on his shoulders, and the quiet voice inside him that said, "Don't drop it." In the hallway outside, Gail shook both their hands and said she'd follow up on paperwork. Then she left with the brisk efficiency of a woman with a full calendar. Nathan and Victoria stood in the courthouse corridor. He turned to her. She was looking at her phone, already managing something, an email, a message, the machine of her life continuing regardless. "Thank you," he said. She looked up. "I mean it," he said. "What you said in there, the way you—" He stopped, started again. "I wouldn't have gotten through that without you." Victoria looked at him for a moment. Something passed through her face, brief, complicated, and then gone. "You would have," she said, "but you didn't have to." She put her phone away. "The home assessor comes this afternoon. We should go." They walked out of the courthouse into the cold November air. Somewhere across the county, in a house on a quiet street in Morrisville, a 7-year-old girl in a yellow sweater was waiting, without knowing yet that the waiting was almost over. And Nathan Cole, who had spent 11 years learning to live without needing anyone, was beginning in the slow and painful way that real things begin to understand that the life he'd built was about to crack open, not to break, to make room. The home assessor came and went in 90 minutes. Her name was Carol Briggs. Mid-40s, clipboard. Sensible shoes. The practiced neutrality of someone who had walked through 1,000 homes, deciding whether they were safe enough for children. She checked the bedrooms, the kitchen, the bathroom. She asked about heating, about water, about the nearest hospital. She wrote things down without sharing what she was thinking. Nathan followed her through the house, answering every question directly. Victoria stayed in the kitchen, making coffee, not hovering. The assessor noticed that too. Nathan could tell by the way Carol glanced back once checking whether Victoria was performing or simply present. She was simply present. That apparently was the right answer. At the end, Carol closed her clipboard and said, "The room for Lily. It's the one at the end of the hall." "Yes," Nathan said. "It needs a few things, a proper lamp, window covering, something on the walls." She looked at him. "It shouldn't feel like a storage room that got cleared out." "I know," he said. "I'll take care of it today." Carol nodded once. "I'll file my report this afternoon. Ms. Klein will call you by evening." After she left, Nathan stood in the hallway outside the empty room. He looked at the bare walls, the plain mattress on the bed frame he'd borrowed from the barn storage, the single window with no curtain. Victoria came and stood beside him. "We need to go to town," she said. "I know." They drove to the hardware store first, then to the one children's section of the general goods store in Harlan. Limited inventory, but enough. Nathan moved through the aisles with the focused practicality of a man building a supply list. He put things in the cart, and Victoria put some of them back and replaced them with better choices without commentary, just decision. A lamp with a warm bulb instead of the bright utility one he'd grabbed. Curtains with a small pattern instead of plain beige. A rug in a soft green. "She's 7, Victoria said, holding up a set of plain white wall hooks. "Not 40. "What does 7 look like?" Victoria looked at him. "You don't know what a 7-year-old's room looks like." "I was an only child. My room had a Navy recruitment poster and a shelf of ship models." She put the hooks back, found different ones, small painted wood shapes, stars and moons. "These," she said. Put them in the cart, kept moving. At the end of one aisle there was a small display of stuffed animals, the kind that ended up in stores like this by accident, a few soft bears and rabbits that had drifted in from some other inventory. Victoria slowed, stopped, picked up a soft gray rabbit with a worn-looking quality to it, like it had been designed to look already loved. She held it for a moment, not deciding, just holding it. "She probably already has something," Nathan said. "She came from her mother's house with one bag," Victoria said quietly. "She has what fit in one bag." She put the rabbit in the cart. They didn't talk on the drive back. Nathan carried everything in from the truck and set it in the hallway, and for the next 3 hours, they worked on the room together. Nathan moved furniture, repaired the sticky drawer on the dresser, replaced the overhead bulb, hung the curtain rod. Victoria made the decisions about where things went, with the clear-eyed practicality of someone designing a space to feel inhabited rather than just furnished. At one point, Nathan was standing on the small step stool hammering in the curtain rod bracket when the hammer slipped and caught his thumb. He swore one sharp word under his breath, and Victoria, standing below, passing him screws, said, without looking up, "Add it to the list of things the Navy didn't prepare you for." He laughed. Actually laughed short and surprised, the kind of laugh that comes out before you've decided to make it. He hadn't heard that sound from himself in a long time. Victoria looked up. Something in her expression shifted briefly, just the corners of her eyes, and then she looked back down at the screws. "Hand me the level," he said. She handed him the level. By evening, the room looked like a room. Not a child's room from a magazine. Just a room that had been thought about, that had warmth in it, that someone had taken time over. The gray rabbit sat on the pillow. Sandra Klein called at 6:47. The report had been filed. Everything was in order. She would bring Lily to the farm the following morning at 10 o'clock. Nathan thanked her and stood in the kitchen with the phone at his side for a long moment. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," Victoria said. He looked at her. "Are you staying tonight?" She picked up her laptop bag from the counter where she'd set it that morning. Seemed to consider something. "Yes," she said. "I think that's the right call." She said it practically because a child arriving at a house where one of the two people she'd met was absent would read as information. Because consistency started now, not when it was convenient. That was the reason she gave. Nathan didn't press for any other. He made dinner again. Victoria worked at the table. Later they sat on opposite ends of the couch and watched the news without really watching it, both of them, inside their own thoughts. And at some point, Victoria's work posture loosened, and Nathan noticed she'd stopped typing and was just sitting quiet in a way that didn't look like her company boardroom self at all. It looked like a person who was tired in an honest way. "You don't have to keep managing things," he said. She looked at him. "Tonight," he said. "You don't have to be on. I mean that." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she set the laptop on the cushion beside her and leaned her head back against the couch. "I'm not used to stopping," she said. "I know. It makes me feel like something's being missed." "I know that too," he said. They sat in the quiet of the farmhouse. Wind outside. The furnace kicking on and off. The kind of silence that takes years to earn in a house and only exists when the house has been lived in long enough. "What was she like?" Victoria asked. "Claire." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Stubborn," he said. "Smart. She had this way of cutting through things, like she could see the shape of a problem before you'd finished explaining it." He paused. "She laughed at things other people didn't think were funny. She hated being told to calm down. She cried at commercials and then got angry that she'd cried." He stopped, breathed. She was real. She was very, very real. Victoria didn't say anything. "I think she would have been a good mother," he said. And his voice changed on the last word barely, but it changed. "I think she was. Sandra said the foster family told her Lily is that she's a well-loved child. You can tell." He stopped again. "You can tell the difference between a child who's been loved and one who hasn't." "Yes," Victoria said. "You can." He looked at her sideways. She was looking at the ceiling. Her face was still in the dim lamplight. "Did someone love you like that?" he asked, carefully. A long pause. "Eventually," she said. "Not at first." He nodded. Didn't push. "Go to sleep, Nathan," she said. "Tomorrow's the day that actually matters." He went. For the first time in 4 days, he slept the whole night through. Lily arrived at 10:03. Sandra Klein's car pulled up the gravel drive, and Nathan was on the porch before it stopped. Not pacing, standing. Hands in his jacket pockets still. He had decided that morning that he was going to be still. That he was going to let her set the pace and not fill every silence with talking, because he was nervous. He had practiced being quiet under pressure. He knew how to do that. He just had to remember to apply it here. Victoria stood just inside the front door, visible through the glass. Present, but not crowding the arrival. Sandra got out first. Then the passenger door opened, and Lily climbed out. She was wearing the yellow sweater again. Her bag, small pink, clearly her own, hung from one shoulder. She stood beside Sandra's car and looked at the farm, at the orchard, at the farmhouse, at Nathan on the porch. She looked at everything carefully, the way she looked at everything like she was making a map. "Hey, Lily," Nathan said. "You made it." She walked toward him without rushing, stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looked up. "Is that an apple tree?" she said. She was pointing at the nearest row of the orchard. "It is," Nathan said. 47 acres of them. She looked out at the rows for a moment. "My mom liked apples," she said. Not to him specifically. Just a fact she was releasing into the air. "Mine did too," Nathan said. "That's actually why we plant them." Lily looked at him. It was the first time she'd looked at him with something other than assessment. Just for a second, just a flicker, there was something else in it. Then it was gone, and she was looking at the house again. "Is there a room for me?" "There is," he said. "Do you want to see it?" She didn't say yes. She just walked up the porch steps past him and through the door he held open. He followed. Inside, Victoria had stepped back from the doorway to give them space. Lily noticed her immediately. "Hi," Lily said. "Hi," Victoria said. "Are you staying here too?" Victoria glanced briefly at Nathan. "Yes," she said. "For now." Lily seemed to process this. "Okay," she said, and kept walking down the hallway. Nathan caught Victoria's eye over Lily's head. Victoria gave the smallest possible tilt of her chin. "Keep going." He turned and led Lily to the end of the hall. He pushed the door open and stepped back. Lily walked in. She stood in the middle of the room and turned in a slow circle, looking at everything. The curtains, the lamp, the rug, the hooks on the wall. She turned all the way around and came back to the bed. She looked at the gray rabbit on the pillow. She picked it up, held it. "Who put this here?" she asked. "We did," Nathan said. "We thought you might like it." She was quiet, holding the rabbit, looking at its face, with an expression he couldn't read. "My mom had a rabbit when she was little," Lily said. "She told me." She looked up. "It got lost." "Maybe this one can stay," Nathan said. Lily looked at the rabbit a moment longer. Then she tucked it under her arm and sat down on the edge of the bed. She put her own bag on the floor and looked at her sneakers. "Is there breakfast here?" she asked. "I didn't eat." "There is," Nathan said. "What do you like?" "Eggs," she said. "But not runny. My mom made them not runny." "I can do not runny," he said. He kept his voice even the same tone he would have used giving any instruction. Practical, safe, not making it bigger than she needed it to be right now. "Okay," she said. And she got up and followed him back down the hall to the kitchen like they'd been doing this for years. Sandra Klein said her goodbyes in the kitchen and reminded Nathan of the first check-in date. Lily didn't watch her go. She had already pulled herself up onto a kitchen chair and was watching Nathan at the stove. He cracked 2 eggs into the pan and listened to them hit the heat and thought about the fact that his hands were absolutely steady. He wasn't sure when that had happened. Victoria poured Lily a glass of orange juice without being asked, set it in front of her. Lily wrapped both hands around it and drank half of it and set it down. "Victoria," Lily said. Victoria looked over. "Yeah. Do you know how to make pancakes?" "I do," Victoria said. "Can we have those tomorrow?" A beat. "Yes," Victoria said. "We can have those tomorrow." Lily nodded satisfied and turned back to watch Nathan at the stove. He slid the eggs onto a plate, not runny solid edges exactly right, and put it in front of her with a fork. She looked at the plate, picked up the fork, ate. Nathan stood at the counter and watched her eat and felt something move through him that was so far outside his vocabulary that he couldn't name it. Not happiness exactly. Not relief. Something older than both of those. Something that felt like the first morning after a very long war. Victoria came to stand beside him. She leaned back against the counterarms, crossed lightly, watching Lily eat with the same quiet attention. She spoke low enough that only he could hear it. She asked about tomorrow, she said. She's already thinking about tomorrow. Nathan didn't answer right away. He watched Lily take another careful bite, hold the fork the way a child holds a fork, swinging her feet slightly under the chair because the chair was too tall and her feet didn't reach. Yeah, he said finally. His voice was rough at the edges. He didn't try to fix it. She is. And that was the thing. That was the whole thing right there in one sentence. A child who had been dropped into the deepest kind of loss, who had every reason to believe that tomorrow was not something you planned for, was already thinking about tomorrow. Which meant somewhere underneath the grief and the wariness and the careful watching, she was still willing to believe it was coming. Nathan Cole, who had built his whole life around the principle of endurance, understood that better than anything he'd ever been taught. You keep going because the next day might be the one that changes things. You hold the line because someone needs you to hold it. He just hadn't known until 4 days ago that the someone he'd been holding it for was sitting in his kitchen eating eggs that weren't runny with a gray rabbit tucked under her arm. The first week was not easy. Nobody had said it would be. But there is a difference between knowing something will be hard and living inside the hardness of it day by day, hour by hour, in a farmhouse in November, where 3 people who barely knew each other were learning the geometry of existing in the same space. Lily woke up the first night at 2 in the morning. Nathan heard it through the wall. Not crying. Just movement, the creak of the bed frame. Small footsteps on the floor. He was up before the sound finished registering boots off moving down the hallway in his socks, the way he'd moved through ships in the dark by memory, by feel. He stopped outside her door. Listened. Silence. He knocked softly. Lily. Nothing for a moment. Then, I'm okay. He stood there a second. Can I come in? A pause. Okay. He opened the door. She was sitting up in the bed with the gray rabbit in her lap, not crying, not visibly upset, just awake. The lamp was on. She'd figured out the switch. Bad dream? He asked. I don't remember, she said. Which probably meant yes. He came and sat in the chair he'd moved to the corner of her room, not beside her bed, not close enough to crowd her, just in the room. Present. He sat the way he'd learned to sit through long night watches on deployment, comfortable with stillness not filling it. You don't have to stay, Lily said. I know, he said. I'm going to anyway. She looked at him. Then she lay back down on her side facing the wall, the rabbit tucked under her chin. She didn't say anything else. Nathan sat in the chair until her breathing evened out. Then he sat for another 10 minutes after that, just to be sure. Then he went back to bed. In the morning, Lily came to breakfast and ate her pancakes. Victoria had made them as promised and didn't mention the night. Nathan didn't either. But when she finished eating, she picked up her plate and carried it to the sink without being asked. It was such a small thing. Nathan noticed it the way you notice the first sign of green on a branch in early spring. Quietly, privately, not wanting to make too much of it, in case you were wrong about what it meant. The days found their shape slowly. The way rivers find their course, not planned, just worn into existence by the same things happening in the same order. Lily woke at 7. Breakfast at 7:30. Nathan drove her to school, Harlan Elementary, 14 minutes the route he'd clocked before the court date. He walked her to the classroom door the first 3 days. On the 4th day, she said, I can go by myself from here. And he stopped at the end of the hall and watched her walk in alone. Her backpack too big for her, the way all backpacks are too big for 7-year-olds, and he stood there until the door closed behind her. Victoria had gone back to her own house by the end of the first week. It was the practical choice. She had a company to run a life with its own structure and demand. She had said so plainly, and Nathan had agreed it made sense. The arrangement had served its purpose. The court was satisfied. Lily was placed. But on Wednesday evening of the second week, Victoria's car came up the gravel drive. Nathan was in the kitchen when he heard it. Lily was at the table doing homework, a worksheet with addition problems she approached with the same serious focus she brought to everything. Nathan looked out the window and watched Victoria park and get out. Who is it? Lily asked, without looking up from her worksheet. Victoria. Lily looked up then. Is she staying for dinner? I don't know yet, Nathan said. She should, Lily said, and looked back down at her worksheet. Victoria came through the door with a bag of groceries and no particular explanation. I was passing the market, she said, which was Nathan knew not true. The market was not on any road between here and her office. I thought I'd cook. You cook, he said. Don't sound surprised, she said. It's unbecoming. Lily looked up from her worksheet. Can you make the pasta with the sauce my mom used to make it? Victoria set the grocery bag on the counter and looked in it. What kind of sauce? Red, Lily said. With the little bits. Tomato with herbs, Victoria said. I don't know what herbs are, Lily said. Herbs are the little bits, Victoria said. Lily nodded satisfied and went back to her worksheet. Nathan leaned against the counter and watched Victoria unload the groceries and thought about the word passing and the fact that this woman who ran a company with 200 employees and made decisions worth millions of dollars without blinking had driven 40 minutes out of her way to bring groceries to a farmhouse on a Wednesday night. He didn't say anything about it. Some things are better acknowledged by letting them happen than by naming them. Victoria came 3 times that second week, then 4 times the third. At some point, the frequency stopped being notable and became instead simply a fact of the household, the way the furnace cycling on at night was a fact of the household. She was there or she was coming. That was the shape of things. Lily adjusted to her presence the way children adjust to things they've quietly decided are good, without announcement, without ceremony. Just a gradual relaxing of the posture, a willingness to talk more freely, to ask for things directly. One afternoon, Nathan came in from the orchard to find Lily at the kitchen table, showing Victoria something in a book, a library book she'd brought home from school, something about animals. Victoria was leaning over reading where Lily pointed, saying hum, in a way that meant she was genuinely interested. Lily was explaining something with her hands, that full-body engagement that children bring to things they care about, the rabbit sitting on the chair beside her like a witness. Nathan stood in the doorway for a moment before either of them noticed him. He had a thought that he recognized immediately as dangerous in the way that true things are sometimes dangerous. He thought, this is what I was supposed to build. Not the farm, not the acreage, not the logistics, not the careful structure of a life organized around work and discipline, and the avoidance of needing anything. This. 3 people in a kitchen on an ordinary afternoon, one of them small, and explaining something with her hands, the other 2 learning to make space for everything she carried. He walked in before the thought could become something he had to deal with. What are we learning? He asked. Whales, Lily said. Did you know they sing? I did know that, he said. Victoria didn't. Lily said with the gentle authority of a child who has just taught an adult something. I knew that whales communicated, Victoria said mildly. I just didn't know it was classified as singing. It is, Lily said firmly. The book says. The book says. Nathan agreed. The 90-day review came on a Tuesday in February. Sandra Klein arrived with a county representative Nathan hadn't met before, a man named Douglas Park, who carried a tablet and said little. They sat in the living room, and Nathan answered their questions and showed them the documentation, school attendance records, medical appointment records, the log he'd kept without being asked every day of Lily's routines and adjustments, and the things that had been hard and the things that had gotten easier. Sandra looked through the log slowly. She turned pages without speaking. You documented every night she woke up, Sandra said. Yes. Every time she asked about her mother. Yes. Sandra looked up. Mr. Cole, this is more thorough than anything I've seen from a first-time placement parent. She deserves a record, Nathan said simply. Of her own life. Something she can have later if she wants it. Sandra looked at him for a long moment. Then she closed the folder. Douglas Park typed something on his tablet. Neither of them said what it was. At the end of the visit, Sandra stood and put her coat on, and then she said, not officially, not in the voice she used for official things, but quietly just to him. She's doing well, Nathan. She's really doing well. He nodded. Didn't trust himself with more than that. The permanent guardianship was granted on a Thursday afternoon. Nathan got the call while he was in the orchard running the late winter inspection. The same thing he'd been doing the morning Sandra Klein had first called him in November. He stood between the rows of bare apple trees and listened to Gail Marsh's voice, telling him it was done permanent, not provisional, not subject to further review. His. Lily was his. He stood there for a while after he hung up. The trees around him were still dormant gray branches. No leaves, the long patient waiting of things that know spring is coming, even when nothing shows it yet. Then he walked back to the house. Lily was at the kitchen table, homework again, always homework. She was dedicated in a way that made Nathan quietly proud, in a manner he was still learning to recognize as pride. Victoria was at the counter with her laptop working coffee at her elbow. "How was the orchard?" Victoria asked without looking up. "Good," he said. He sat down at the table across from Lily. She looked up. He looked back at her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking." She made a face, the particular face of a 7-year-old who finds adults mildly baffling, and went back to her homework. Nathan looked across the kitchen at Victoria. She had looked up from the laptop and was watching him with an expression he'd learned to read over these months, careful, perceptive, already knowing something had happened. He nodded once. Her face did something quiet and complicated. She looked down at the laptop, looked back up. "Lily," she said. "What?" Lily said. "What do you want for dinner?" "The pasta," Lily said immediately. "The pasta," Victoria said. "Of course." And that was it. That was the announcement, and the celebration, and the acknowledgement, all of it folded into the ordinary continuation of a Tuesday afternoon in a farmhouse kitchen. Which was, Nathan understood, exactly the right way to do it. Because permanence doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives the way all real things arrive, quietly in the middle of ordinary moments, disguised as nothing special, until you look back later and realize it was everything. That night, after dinner, after homework was finished, and the dishes were done, and Lily had gone through her bedtime routine, teeth faced the gray rabbit positioned with specific and non-negotiable care on the left side of the pillow. Nathan sat on the edge of her bed, and she looked up at him with her mother's eyes and said, "Are you going to check on me tonight?" "If you need me," he said. "What if I don't need you, but I want you to anyway?" He looked at her. "Then I'll check anyway." She seemed to consider whether this was a satisfactory answer. Decided it was. She pulled the blanket up. "Nathan," she said. "Yeah." "Is Victoria going to keep coming here?" He thought about Victoria's car in the driveway on a Wednesday night, the groceries that were not on the way home from anywhere. He thought about the way she leaned over a library book about whales. The way she moved through the kitchen like she knew where things were because by now, she did. He thought about what she'd said in the foster home 4 months ago to a small girl with a red crayon who hadn't trusted anyone yet. "We're not leaving." "Yeah," he said. "I think she is." Lily nodded, closed her eyes. "Good," she said. "She makes good pasta." He turned off the lamp, sat in the dark for a moment. "Lily." "Your mom loved you," he said. "She kept you safe, and she raised you well, and she loved you. I want you to know that I know that." The room was quiet. "I know," Lily said, soft and small in the dark. "She told me." "Good," he said. "Hold on to that." He got up and went back down the hall. Victoria was still at the kitchen table, laptop open, but not looking at the screen. Looking at the table. She looked up when he walked in. "She asleep?" Victoria asked. "Almost." Victoria nodded. She closed the laptop. She looked at her coffee cup, found it empty, didn't move to refill it. Just sat. "Victoria," he said. She looked up. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them, and then looked at her, and he said the thing that had been true for long enough now that not saying it had become its own kind of dishonesty. "This stopped being an arrangement a long time ago," he said. She held his gaze. Didn't deflect, didn't manage, didn't reach for the professional composure that had been her first language for as long as he'd known her. She just sat with it. "I know," she said. "I'm not saying it to pressure you," he said. "I'm saying it because you told me no lies between us. And I've been not saying this for 2 months, which is close enough to a lie that it bothers me." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more honest than a smile. "You know what my condition was?" she said. "In the beginning, no emotional manipulation." "I remember." "This doesn't feel like manipulation," she said. "That's the problem." "Is it a problem?" She looked at him for a long moment. The farmhouse was quiet around them. Outside, the February wind moved through the orchard where the trees were still bare, and still waiting, and still entirely certain in the way that living things are certain that the season was going to turn. "No," she said finally. "I don't think it is." He reached across the table. She looked at his hand. Then she put hers in it. They sat like that in the kitchen of the old farmhouse. Two people who had come to each other out of necessity, and stayed out of something that had no clean name but didn't need one. And outside in the bare orchard under a winter sky, the first impossible suggestion of green was beginning to show at the tips of the branches. Spring was coming. It always does for the people willing to stay long enough to see it. Nathan Cole had survived 3 deployments, a foreclosure, 11 years of chosen silence, and the specific kind of loneliness that comes from being capable of everything except asking for help. He had built a farm from debt. He had walked into a courtroom and told a judge the truth. He had sat in a dark chair in a child's room until her breathing evened out and done it again the next night and the night after that. He had learned late and hard and imperfectly the one thing the Navy had never once taught him, and the farm had never demanded, and the long quiet years had never required. He had learned to stay, and in the end, in the cold farmhouse kitchen with his daughter asleep down the hall, and the woman across the table with her hand in his that turned out to be the only thing that had ever mattered. That was enough. That was everything. That was home.